So let's get started. I don't know that I'll need the full 30 minutes, so that'll allow us to have more Q&A. But I'm just going to talk briefly about the resources in our KL2 program at UCLA, and talk a little bit about these four main things: our KL2 awards, our Successful Grants Library, our K Scholar Society, and our Grant Studios. So the KL2 award is our version of a K08, K23. It's an institutional K award, which means that the CTSI program nationally, NCATS, has provided us funds for career development awards, but then we can internally have our own study section here at UCLA, and then give out career development awards to faculty at one of the four UCLA CTSI institutions. These awards are very similar in structure to K08, K23s, but they're only 3-year awards. The CTSI as a whole is really to promote translational science at various institutions, including UCLA. And as translational science, we as our KL2 program are interested in as a program promoting research in basic clinical and health services research. I bring this point up because I think sometimes people get confused and think that their project needs to touch, the full spectrum of translational science, but that's pretty impossible for most projects. We really fund as a whole, as a program, we fund the spectrum, but most projects are really in just one area. They're either T1, T2, T3, T4 science. So again, as I mentioned before, the program is just our career development awards to individuals that support up to 3 years of support. This is our current level of funding, and this is going to probably change a little bit with our renewal, which just went in. So starting in 2021 cycle, assuming we get refunded, the amount of support will ideally go up just a little bit. But currently, it provides $75,000 in salary support with additional money for research, tuition, coursework, travel, and statistical support. To be eligible, the same criteria for our KL2 is the same for a K08, K23. You must have some sort of professional degree. It can be an MD or a PhD, some sort of doctoral or professional research degree. You must have a faculty title as of July 1. There are a lot of different faculty titles, and depending on what institution you're at, it can be a little confusing as to what constitutes a faculty title. So if you have a title and are wondering whether you're eligible, I can't give you a clear, succinct answer. So if you have a question, you should contact us to clarify. You need a commitment of 75% effort to the KL2 unless you're in a procedural specialty like surgery, and then you can ask for a minimum of 50%, but you need to ask for that ahead of time and clarify. You do need to be U.S. citizen or a permanent U.S. resident. I think one of the questions in the chat box asked if you're on a J1 visa, are you eligible? And the answer is no. So if you are currently on a visa, you should immediately, if you can, start to work towards getting permanent resident status with a green card. For the KL2 program, and I'm sure for K awards in general, you need to have that status by the time you are awarded. So there's a bit of risk if you apply before your green card is awarded. This is a common issue about whether you can take other funding or whether you can have other funding, so I'm going to just go over that. When you apply for the K award, you can be a PI of NIH grants for like an R03 or an R21, but if you have prior funding from a larger grant like an R01 as the principal investigator, then you would be ineligible for a K award. If you are a co-investigator on an R01, that's okay. That may affect what funding you can take concurrently, but being the PI of a K award is okay if you've been a co-investigator on an R01 or equivalent grant. If you are previously on a K-12 grant, you can switch to a KL2, but the total amount of years of support cannot be more than 5 years. And as I mentioned before, there are restrictions on being a PI on a previous or current grant. So you can't concurrently be PI of an R01. You can't have two K08, K23s at the same time. You can't have a VA career development award in the past or concurrently. And you can't have two different K awards applications under review in a similar area. I think that's pretty unusual. But if you're thinking about submitting a K23 and an R01 at the same time, I would stop to think about whether that's wise strategy no matter what. But if you really want to do this, it's technically possible if they're completely unrelated. Future funding. Once you get awarded a KL2, the common strategy for our KL2 program is to have individuals switch to an individual K08, K23 or VA Career Development Award because those grants provide more years of funding and more dollars of support. But if you do get a KL2 and you switch to a K08, K23, you have to give up the KL2. We also encourage individuals who are KL2 awardees to apply for R01 or equivalent grants. And there's a whole set of criteria about how to do that, which I won't go into details, but I provided a couple of notices that provide more details on how KL2 awardees can apply for R01 funding and how that would work. The selection criteria, I won't go into great detail because it's identical to what you've already just heard from Dr. Saluski and Mangione about the criteria for evaluation. And then here's a list of the application components. Again, very, very similar to a K08, K23. I think the only thing that's different is maybe our institutional letters of support. We limit it to 2 pages, and our letters of support for the mentoring team, we limit it to 6 pages maximum. We also don't ask for external letters of recommendation. In a typical K application, you not only need letters of support, but you need letters of recommendation. Our KL2 program is an annual award cycle, so just once a year. We have a pre-application deadline in early December and the full application deadline in February. That pre-application deadline is really for essentially your specific aims and a title and a list of your mentors. And we ask for this because we can review this and quickly determine if there's any obvious issues that we want to make sure you address. It's not really as a screening process, but as a way for you to get quick feedback on the aims. Not that we edit it from a scientific standpoint, but we kind of make sure that the big issues are okay. For example, your appointment is all right, and if there's some obvious things that you should address. For the last 3 years, we've actually added interviews to the cycle. So we will, if you make the top roughly third of applications, we have interviews, and then after the interviews, we make our final decisions, and then the notifications go out in May or June. And the grant date start date is July 1st. I wanted to make one thing clear. It's not on the slide, but it comes up commonly. So I just want to make this point about whether you can apply concurrently for a K08, K23, K1, and the KL2. It gets really tricky when you apply for both programs simultaneously. I think one clear restriction is you can, since our deadline is February, we restrict applicants who have submitted a K08 or K23 in the same NIH cycle. So essentially, If you apply for the KL2 program, you cannot submit a K08, K23 in February, March of that same year. If you submit a K08, K23, K01 in October of the previous year, then that's okay. But obviously your scores are going to, for that grant, are going to come in about the same time as you're applying for the KL2 program. So once you get your score, you're required to let us know what the score is. And depending on what the score is, that may or may not make you ineligible for the K2 application. If you have questions about this, we can answer them. And if you plan on doing this, you should come to us and let us know what you're doing. But again, if you're applying for the October 2020 cycle for a K23, for example, and then plan on submitting a KL2 in February 2021, you should talk with us so that we can coordinate. If you think you are planning on applying for the February K23, then you cannot apply for the February KL2 cycle. And then if you plan on applying for June 2021, then that's actually what I recommend, is because you can apply for the KL2 program in February. We'll provide comments and feedback. Hopefully we'll fund you, but then whether we fund you or whether we don't, you can immediately apply for the June cycle and have our comments as help and preparation for your June submission. Our grants library has been online for several years now. It's one of the most used resources in our UCLA CTSI. And we have a number of successful grants that are available for you to view. And I think this is an extraordinarily helpful resource because it shows you a lot of different things. It shows you what a successful grant looks like from a content standpoint, from a formatting standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, from a visual standpoint. It helps you see how successful grants are constructed. Obviously, there are many ways to write a successful grant, and there's just a few examples, but it can be very helpful just in terms of sort of the basics. We have a bunch of different types of grants, not just K awards, but we have R awards, U awards, bio sketches. And the way to access it, you can see the link here, which shows you a video instruction on how to access. There was a question in the chat about, do you need a UCLA ID to access it? No, you don't. There are explanations for how you access it. You just need a CTSI account, and a CTSI account doesn't require you to be a UCLA employee or have UCLA ID, but you will have to apply for access, and it's all in there. But if you have questions, just email us. You can email Lisa. You can email the CTSI, and they'll give you step-by-step instructions on how to get an account and then access our grants library. The grants library is only online. It's time limited, so after I think 6 months or so, your access will be turned off, and you can reapply and get access for longer. But here's an example of a screenshot of what's on there, and as you can see, it shows you the title and the type of grant, and it also shows you what the contents are. So if you have issues with finding things that are helpful to you, let us know. And if you're looking for something specific and you don't see it, you can also let us know. It may be that we don't have it, and we're always looking for input on what additional information people are looking for. So, but here's an example of a screenshot of a specific grant. As you can see, when you do access the website, you're actually viewing the grants directly through the web page. This system doesn't allow you to print. It doesn't allow you to copy or download to your computer. You can't email or forward these grants. And this is a secure way for us to share the grants, but it allows us to control access from the point of view that there are individuals who have provided their grants to us, And some of that information is sensitive and they don't really want it shared well, wider than our audience here. So that's why we use the system. And in the future, if you get your grants funded, we would be more than welcome for you to share your grants with us so that you can share your experiences and success with others. I'll mention our K Scholar Society. If you have a career development award, we highly encourage you to sign up for our K Scholar Society. When you're writing a K award, we highly encourage you to indicate in your education plan that you will join the K Scholar Society when you get funded. This is a monthly career development seminar for those junior faculty with a K award. If you are a junior faculty member at Cedars, Drew, or Harbor, we also invite you. You don't need a K award or a career development award to join our K Scholar Society. It's a 2-year curriculum. We provide training in grant writing, communication, team science, entrepreneurship, leadership, managing your scientific team. We have a professional grant writer on staff who provides consultation on editing your grant. We provide mock study sections, scientific networking, and you get priority for our grant writing studios, which I'll tell you about right now. So grant writing studios are longitudinal mentoring for your K or R grant. It's individualized to you. So the studio, we take senior faculty who are at one of our institutions and we assign them based on expertise. And we generally have 3 to 4 faculty who are assigned to you, and they will help you through a series of studios or meetings to help you go from the conception of your K or R grant to the final product. Typically, these studios include 3 different meetings, and they're dedicated to seeing your success. It finishes with a mock study section where your grant application is presented at our K Scholar Society mock study section in front of all the junior faculty and senior faculty. And it's an important part of that process so that you can see what a study session looks like. But the most important part really is that you're getting very specific, individualized advice on writing your grant from people who are expert in your area and from people who are expert in writing K awards or R awards. So that's the last slide I have. I think we can take questions. I'm as I said, didn't take the full time, and we can go back to some of the questions that people had asked. So let's see here.
Hi. So Mitch, do you want me to read some?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so let me get back to where I was on the list. Okay, so the next question is from Angela Venegas, and she asks if there's a way to access the sample grants without a UCLA login, and if so, it could be sent to all of us. So I think Mitch, in your talk you went over the access, but what about people who don't have a UCLA login?
Yeah, I think maybe if Lisa wants to chime in, but you don't need to be at UCLA. Certainly, Angela, I think that you're at Drew, and all Drew faculty have access, but there's a specific way to do that. Lisa, do you want to chime in there?
Yes, actually, everyone needs a UCLA logon, but then anyone can get it. They don't need to be an employee of the university, but the grant library is restricted to the UCLA CTSI institutions.
Okay. I think that the next question is about the availability of the slides. Lisa, would you like to confirm how people can access the slides after the talks?
We will post the slides and the video on the CTSI website, and we'll let all the attendees know after everything gets posted.
Okay, the next question was about the timeline, which I believe I covered in my talk, so we'll skip over that one. If you have something specific that didn't get answered in the talk, please cut and paste your question in again. The next question was about a co-mentor outside the institution. Is someone you've worked with in the past or trained with? I think we hit the answer to that question already. Again, if we didn't specifically answer your situation, please cut and paste it again. The next one was about J visa status, and I heard Mitch answer that one in your talk. So again, if there's a specific aspect of that you need more information on, feel free to add another comment at the end. The next question was about clarification by what we mean by a track record of the mentor. Do we mean their funding or their record of supporting people on K awards? So Mitch, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it can be nuanced. There are some factors that make a mentor clearly qualified. So one aspect is that their lab is active, and by active I mean that they have active NIH support. If the mentor doesn't have any active NIH support but has other funding from other sources, that's good. But I've seen NIH study sections critique the mentor for not having NIH funding. So the ideal mentor has NIH funding, and I would even add to that the ideal mentor has funding from the institute to which you're applying. Now, if your mentor has NIH money from another institute, that's probably fine, but even better would be funding from the institute that you're applying to. It doesn't mean that your primary mentor can't be a primary mentor if they don't have active NIH funding, but it can raise a flag, and it could be an issue. In addition to NIH funding, they ideally have a scientific track record where they're clearly senior enough. So I think if your primary mentor is an assistant professor with limited publications, that definitely raise a flag. If they're an associate professor, then it could be a gray zone. If they are an associate professor but very successful with a lot of NIH funding and a long track record of scientific productivity, then that's probably not going to be much of an issue. Obviously, the ideal mentor would be a full professor. And then I think having some track record of mentoring is worth documenting, and I think most senior faculty have something to say about the number of trainees that they've had at the undergraduate, medical student, graduate student level to faculty level. And ideally, they've had some track record of funding or mentoring faculty. If they don't necessarily need to have been a mentor on a K award in the past. Obviously, at one point you have to have your first K award mentee. Obviously, if that faculty member has had some K award mentees, that's in the past, it's better. But if they have never had a K award mentee, then they should have some detailed description of their experience as a mentor. Carol, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that what you said is right on the mark. But the other thing is, if your mentor had a K award, and I remember back, 27 K awards ago when I had the first one I mentored, and it was only 2 years after my K award finished, and but I used that as like a clear understanding of the program and the goals, and it was at the same institute that mine was at, NIA, and I was a recipient of an R01 from them at the time. So, they knew who I was. They knew that I performed well on my K awards. So, I kind of used my own track record as being a mentee for a qualification for being a mentor, and they bought it, So I think, and obviously I had mentored medical students and residents on smaller projects at that point, but you're right, everybody has to have like a first one. And I think it does help if maybe you've been in the program, so.
Yeah. I would add one thing, that this whole mentorship is a really important topic because K awards are as much to you as it is sometimes to your mentor, depending on the institute and the study section. And I will be the first to say there's a lot of arbitrariness to it all. But remember, they're getting lots of applications and they have to make a decision somewhere about who gets it and who doesn't. And you know, on paper, it is sometimes the qualifications of a mentor that might push the study section to rate one application higher and one lower. That being said, there is a bit of a game, and you have to play that game well. It very well may be that the person that you work most closely with, who's your day-to-day mentor, is not on paper the ideal mentor from a grants K award study section standpoint. So you have to be strategic about that. It means that the person you work most closely with has to understand that. And it may mean that on paper, you bring in someone more senior who's going to, you know, on paper be your primary mentor, but in reality, it's an opportunity to bring in that senior mentor for you to get your K award and for you to benefit from both mentors at the same time. And in the end, down the road, your primary mentor, who's really giving you the advice every day, will develop a track record where they also on paper look like the perfect mentor.
And I'm going to add just a little bit to that because I've been in this role. Sometimes I will be listed as the primary mentor, and certainly I will have like oversight in the research. But when we describe me in the budget justification, and you know, we don't get money anyway, but we get described, we'll say that I'm like the overarching career mentor. So I'm going to be helping with the research. I'm going to be helping with the promotion process. I'm going to be helping the individual prioritize their time. But we've got, you know, Dr. So-and-so over here who, you know, usually is younger than me, maybe an associate professor, but is like, you know, the best expert in the research area at UCLA, who's going to be a co-mentor, and we're going to call that person the research mentor. And so, you know, that person's going to really, you know, be in that lane of helping really with the project and the science. And we're going to make it really clear that my expectation is that, you know, Dr. X, the research mentor, will be the senior author on the papers and the applicant will be the first author, but that, you know, I will have this overall supervisory role. I'll be on the scientific team, but I'm likely to be in a middle author position. And I think, you know, with some K awards that I've been involved with, describing that configuration with maybe a research mentor who isn't as seasoned or experienced seems to work pretty well.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like us to move on to the next question, which is, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the innovation section. Some advice I've heard is that NIH is rather conservative on this front and likes to fund projects that are, quote, safer and only incrementally innovative. Is this true for K awards? Should applicants temper the innovation section as well as the scope of the project? You want to take that one, Mitch?
I think it's hard to answer this question in the abstract, and I'd probably want to read what you have to say. But I would say, no, I think that the innovation for your project should be clear. I do think NIH can be conservative. They definitely want to make sure that the project is feasible. But for a career development award, they're funding sort of the career trajectory of the candidate. So I think they want to have some vision for what you will eventually achieve in your career. So I think a little bit of sort of 10 years from now, what you're going to hopefully achieve is worthwhile saying, and that level of innovation would be a good thing to express. Obviously, there's a limit. You don't want to have a project and a career that's too grandiose. So again, it's hard to answer this question in the abstract.
I mean, the one thing that I would say about the last part of your question, which is about scope, most junior people, the first time you write a grant, you're writing for a 5-year award. 5 years seems like a long time, and you're really ambitious. And what you've really done is you've written like a 20-year amount of work. And so, hopefully if you have a good mentor, they're reading that application and they're making sure it's feasible. So, if the study section sees that you're proposing a randomized controlled trial with 5,000 patients and you think you could do that on a $50,000 a year research budget, they're going to think, well, this person hasn't gotten very good advising and, this really isn't feasible at all. And they're going to kick it back and tell you that. So I think the main thing is like, remember, you have an educational plan. You've got a project. The project should be designed to give you terrific information for the preliminary studies of your first R01. And so it should really set the stage for that. But so, you don't want it to be like so wildly ambitious that it's not feasible and that you might come up short with nothing at the end of the time. That's what study section is worried about. So invariably, when I see that first draft, I hack like 2/3 of what the person wants to do scientifically out of the grant, because I think, when you're early in your career, you just think you can do a lot more than most of us are capable of.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people put in long-term and short-term goals for themselves, both from a career standpoint and from a scientific standpoint. And I think that the time horizon for the long term would be, for example, what you could accomplish at the end of your first R01. That would be the long-term goal. Like if you said, I'm going to cure cancer, that would seem a little too ambitious, something that you're probably won't going to achieve in your first R01.
So the next question asks if physicians are eligible for K-23s after completing residency without having pursued subspecialty or research fellowship. Definitely, you don't have to have subspecialty training. There are a lot of general internists who apply for K-23s. I think it's pretty tough to be competitive if you haven't done a postdoc research fellowship or you don't have publications. Now, the exception to the rule might be if you are, let's say you were an MSTP and you're an MD PhD and you've published 5 or 6 papers from your PhD, you might be in a position where you could be competitive for a K-23. But I think somewhere along the way, you have to have gotten formal research training and you have to show that you could take a project from conception to publications, which is usually what most people do when they do a research postdoc. But Mitch, any thoughts about this one?
I think I think it can be done. If you don't have a PhD or a master's level research degree, I think you're still eligible with an MD, but or an RN or a DDS. But I guess if you don't have that formal degree after your name that indicates you've had research training, you can still apply, but then you better have enough publications to indicate that you're, that you have had research experience, I would say.
Yeah. The next question asked, does gastroenterology fall under quote unquote procedural exception for the 50% time commitment? I think that it depends on what you do. It depends on your job. If you are the person who, does the ERCPs at your place, and, it's obviously a very technical procedure. It requires a certain amount of case volume to stay good at it. It's more about how you describe what you do. If you're somebody who sees, you're running the functional bowel clinic and you're, seeing a bunch of ambulatory patients, probably not, So I think it isn't so much specialty, it's more about the content of what you do and the case that you make, that to stay excellent at your procedure, you need to be doing it a certain amount of time. But Mitch, anything else to add there?
Yeah, I think talk to your program officer. They will give you a lot of good advice about what's possible and what you need to document, whether I would assume that's also a little bit institute specific.
Yes, yeah. So the next one says it can be a bit daunting to reach out to the projects officer. Can you elaborate a bit on how to initiate, cultivate the relationship, do's and don'ts? How do you advise we maintain the relationship for future funding? So I'll take this one. First of all, the people who sign up at the 11 or so institutes to be the career development project officer tends to be somebody who really likes talking to young people. And really likes playing a role in developing young scientists, cares passionately about that. So you shouldn't be nervous about them. I mean, they're sitting around waiting to hear from you. They're not sitting around, they're busy, but they want to hear from you. I think that the do's and don'ts are be highly respectful of their time and expertise and listen to what they say. So, if you cold call someone and they've never met you and they haven't had a chance to see your aims yet, that first call is going to be a waste of time for them. So you want to send an email and you want that, you want a locked PDF of not the first draft of your aims, but the 10th draft that you've gone over with your mentor and with your collaborators, and you all feel like it's a strong one-pager. And you want to send that email and you want to say, I'm Dr. So-and-so, recently appointed assistant professor at UCLA. I'm just starting the process of developing my K award. I've developed these aims in collaboration with my proposed mentor, it would be extremely helpful if you could look at these aims. I'm thinking of them as addressing this part of the strategic plan at NCI. I would like to set up a 20-minute phone call at your convenience to discuss the aims with you and to get your advice on how I might be able to strengthen them to have them be competitive at your institution. So, now the person knows the topic, had a chance to look at your aims ahead of time, understands that you understand that his or her time is limited, so you've asked for 20 minutes. If you can, it's a great idea to have the proposed mentor on the call listening too. If you can't set that up logistically, it's not a deal breaker, but especially if the proposed mentor is somebody who knows the project officer, for example, at National Institute of Aging, my project officer was Robin Barr. Robin Barr was the project officer for Career Development Awards for the next 20 years after I finished. So every time I had a mentee who was going to NIA, Robin loved hearing from me and having me on the phone too. And I could say, Robin, this is Sarah, who's our new assistant professor. And, I think this is a great proposal. What do you think? I think it helps if your mentor knows the project officer. If they don't, they'll meet them when you do. But the do's and don'ts are really, the do's are be respectful of their time, be very clear about why you're calling them, make sure you thank them, make sure you listen to them, make sure when you submit the proposal that you send them a locked PDF and a second thank you. And then, when you get the grant, you're going to get your reviews first. And when you get the reviews, you ask for, another 20 or 30-minute phone call so you can go through the reviews with them. And, what they'll tell you is just like, oh yeah, this one person was squawking about that point, but everybody else in the room was fine with it, so that's one you can ignore. But this other point over here, if you don't address this really well, that's the deal breaker, and so you're going to revise and resubmit. The project officer, if they're good, will give you like a lot of guidance about what you need to pay attention to in the review. So, that's a second contact. And then when you get the grant, you thank them, right? And then, every time you present at a national meeting, let's say you're at the Diabetes Institute and those project officers, they all have to go to the ADA meeting. you send them a little link and you say, oh, by the way, I got this podium presentation. It's on the project. I know you're really busy. I wanted you to just know where it is. And, if you can come, that would be great. If you can't, that's fine. Every time you submit a paper, submit the manuscript to the project officer and say, hey, here's the paper for specific aim 1. And, we're sending it to JAMA or wherever you're going to send it. And, let them know when it's published. They use that information when they write the reports to Congress and when they, have to answer to the head of the institute about how their portfolio is doing. So make their job easy, don't make them have to track you down to find out about your productivity. Every award you get, every poster you get, every talk you get, every paper accepted, just drop them a little quick email. That's how you maintain the relationship. Because when you're successful, they're successful. Their success is rated on how well you do. When you get promoted to associate professor, definitely let them know. When you get your first art grant, even if it's not from their institute, thank them for helping you get a start. Definitely let them know. So these can be just little quick emails over time, and if you do that really well, then, when somebody like Robin Barr retires, they ask you to write one of the toasts at the retirement party, because you would like talking to the guy for 27 years. And so, that's how the relationship works. So, and they look forward to hearing from you. Obviously you're not spending hours with them at the meetings or anything. It's more just the FYIs along the way, I would say. Mitch, anything to add?
I would just echo what you said. I think that's all extraordinarily good advice. And maybe the only thing I would add would be there's a question that I don't ask ever, which is, should I submit this? They aren't going to tell you whether or not to submit it, or they'll answer it, but they won't give you an honest answer. They're going to tell you submit. That's not their job.
Right.
The question to ask is, how can I make this better? How might I frame this best for the study section or for the institute? Are there priorities that I should address, ways in which I should present this work best? But they're not going to tell you, they're never going to say, don't submit this. That's not their job.
Yeah, they get judged on how many submissions they generate, so they're really going to tell you to submit stuff. I agree with that. The next question asks, do you think that the financial consequences of COVID-19 will change the funding for K Awards? Mitch, why don't you take that one? Did you have a crystal ball?
I just had a conversation with NIDA, because that's my funding agency. Just kind of after COVID-19, I had a conversation with my program officer, just let her know that, hey, everything's on track. It hasn't affected our work, and this is what we're doing. But it did come up that there's a lot of money that NIDA couldn't spend because of COVID-19. There were all their summer programs and internships where they had students, undergraduate and graduate students coming to NIDA and various programs. So all that money that they were going to spend won't be spent on that, and they'll spend it on other things. So I don't really know. It's a good question, but don't really know.
Yeah, I think the main thing is we have not heard, at least I have not heard, that there is a big NIH budget cut in the works. And if anything, the COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized the importance of science. I mean, you're seeing a lot more requests for proposals, both related to COVID, but also related to chronic diseases that are really important cofactors for who gets so sick from COVID, like hypertension and diabetes and heart disease and pulmonary disease and all the things we all study. So I don't think we've seen any signals yet that there's going to be like a crashingly huge cut for NIH. NIH historically has had very strong bipartisan support. So, whichever way the election goes, I don't think it will dramatically decrease the budget, but we really haven't heard either way. The next one's one for you, Mitch. It says, can you apply for a KL2 and a K23 in the same cycle?
Yeah, I think I addressed that, but just to clarify, the quick answer is absolutely no, you cannot. And just to reiterate that one more time, you know, our deadline is typically end of February. So if you submit a K award, you can't submit a K award for the February 5th deadline, or I think that's what would be the deadline. Or if you're resubmitting a previous application, your deadline would be March. That's considered to be the same cycle. So if you're resubmitting an application, March, that would not be good, but any other cycle would be fine.
Okay. The next one is, hold on. Can you utilize the Grant Studio to prepare K grants if you're not part of the K Scholars Society?
We have limited capacity. So the technically answer is yes, but practically it is a little more challenging. Our priority is for people who are in the K Scholar Society and also people who have applied for the KL2 program. So one incentive to apply for the KL2 program is that we prioritize you for a studio. We're not guaranteeing a studio, but it definitely gives you a leg up. So if neither of those situations apply to you, if the cycle is not right and you don't have a chance to apply for the KL2 program first, definitely reach out to us. If we can accommodate you, we will definitely try. But one good strategy is apply for the KL2 program because that will put you on the priority list.
So the next question is, who should we reach out to in order to determine if our proposal would be a good fit for the KL2?
If your proposal is a good fit for a K award, then you're definitely a good fit for the KL2 program. If that's still a little vague, you can definitely reach out to Lisa. You can reach out to me. I'm the equivalent of the program officer. So, you know, send me your specific aims and I'll look at it and I'll tell you what I think. I'm not going to tell you whether or not to apply. I'm probably going to be more like a program officer, like definitely apply. But there are some things like if you really are not eligible, you're no longer a junior faculty member. If you're not actually a faculty member or you don't meet the eligibility criteria, I'll let you know. But from a scientific standpoint, you know, I'll definitely give you advice and try to help give you some tips on how to make it better. But just reach out to us. I'll let you know.
So one question here is, may I schedule a discussion with someone to determine the best grant vehicle to go forward with? And I would say yes. I mean, I think that if you send a description of your question yourself and your project, you could send it to Lisa, and then Lisa could help us triage to somebody on the executive oversight committee for the KL2 who has the expertise to help you. You know, so if you're in basic neuroscience, we have a specific person we might send you to, or, you know, whatever. So anything else to add there, Lisa or Mitch?
No, I think that's right.
Okay. Next one. My mentor has a K99 and now has an R01. However, he did not concluded a graduate student mentorship. Oh, he hasn't been a graduate student mentor yet. Is this a problem? So I think somebody who has never been a mentor and has an R01, I think we've talked about this issue about augmenting maybe with a more senior person with a track record. So I'm gonna bypass that one. The next one is related to a question. I'm curious about the timeline reaching out to the program officers. For example, when do you recommend having a specific aims page drafted or ready? If we're sending this document to the program officer before applying, we need this early. What if it changes as the course of the writing unfolds? So here's the thing. I think, first of all, if this is your first time writing a federal grant, you better have budgeted 6 months. It's very, very hard to get, you know, a competitive proposal together in less than that. The specific aims should be one of the earliest documents that you write and refine. And once you have something you're kind of happy with, even that meeting with the program officer may change the aims a lot from what you learned during that meeting.